and welcome to the Washington Farm Bureau Update, a podcast designed to provide the latest agriculture, legislative, and Farm Bureau information. Greetings, everyone. I'm Ben Tyndall, and thank you for listening. Well, as COVID-19 continues to have a deep impact on agriculture, we are seeing our members and the agriculture community in general working diligently to address that impact. In today's episode, we're going to look specifically at the challenges facing ranchers and cattle producers and the steps that they are taking to overcome these challenges and prepare for a new future. This afternoon, I'm joined by Bridget Coon, who is currently the president of the Adams County Farm Bureau, and we're going to talk about just that thing. So, let's dive right in, shall we? Hello, Bridget.
Hey there.
Well, thank you for joining us and for being a part of this conversation. Now, before we dive into the topic at hand, I want to take a minute and let's talk about your background. You have an impressive resume, so tell us a little bit about that in particular as it relates to cattle and the beef industry.
Okay, well, I'm Bridget Coon, and I am currently the Adams County Farm Bureau president. I am here at the Bayou Ranch near Benge, Washington. Get a Google map out here in Adams County. And we're a fifth generation cow, calf, and hay operation with my husband, Paul, and his family. I also am a digital media consultant for a lot of agriculture, beef industry related clients. I do that work from home here on the ranch. Going way back in the beef industry and Farm Bureau and agriculture, I grew up actually on the west side, the Kent Auburn River Valley, about 15 minutes south of Seattle, where it's an urban environment, but I was a farm kid. So we had a feedlot and farm that we operated with my parents and my grandparents. So I've been involved in agriculture and sort of interfacing or communicating with people outside of our industry my entire life because of growing up over there. And so after graduating high school, I went to Washington State University, where I majored in political science and did a little campaign work, and that parlayed into an appointment with the Bush administration, where I worked at the most boring federal agency for a short time, the General Services Administration. I was the confidential assistant to the chief of staff, but after that, I was able to actually do a little work in the Office of Political Affairs at the White House during the 2006 cycle. From there, I went to work for a public affairs firm that was based in Washington, based in Bellevue, but working out of our DC office. I got to work with what we call dirt and water clients. So our PUDs that operate the dams, Weyerhaeuser, the potato guys. I basically got to kind of go back to my agricultural roots with my career, and then ended up back home in Washington, working for Dino Rossi's gubernatorial campaign. From there, I worked for Reagan Dunn on the King County Council, where I staffed him on communications and land use or property rights issues. So that was really exciting to me to get even further back to helping agriculture and helping local property owners navigate this urban county that they have to work in. So from there, I had the opportunity to go to work for the Washington State Beef Commission in consumer education. And I was excited about that opportunity because that was when the Beef Commission Board really got serious about explaining and busting some of the negative myths around how we raise cattle for beef. So that was cool. And then shortly after I had that position, I met my husband, moved out here to the ranch, and he keeps me in peppy internet so I could continue, that type of work. And I've continued doing that work as a consultant for various organizations and businesses connected to beef and agriculture. Honestly, growing up and sort of having this, kind of fire to communicate and to defend our industry, I wasn't sure there was a production agriculture place for me. Agriculture is not like a growing industry, in the 90s and early 2000s in Western Washington. It was kind of on the decline. And so I thought maybe my spot was to kind of get in there and support the people that were still doing it. But through Staffing Reagan, I was going to our King Pierce Farm Bureau meetings, and Kristen wrote me into Young Farmers and Ranchers. I was still,
Yes.
I spent my weekends on my parents' place helping them. And so I never really went out of the world, but I wasn't sure where I'd land. And so Farm Bureau and kind of staying in contact with Farm Bureau over those years where I wasn't actively farming almost like gave me that idea that it was still possible for me. And so honestly, I couldn't be more happy that I'm getting to kind of use my education, use my like predominant skill set to communicate and navigate the digital world for our producers, while also getting to be around cattle and hay and in a farm and ranch business like we have here.
You mentioned briefly you've been involved with the Farm Bureau for quite a while. Tell us a little bit about the different programs or the involvement that you currently have in Farm Bureau.
Oh my, it's like as the years rack up, it's kind of a blur, right? So right. Like I said, it was about sort of keeping that toe in and keeping connected, and then learning about programs like Young Farmers and Ranchers. I've served as the state Young Farmers and Ranchers chair. I think the 1 year I was chair was when we launched the leadership conference, like the spring leadership conference, which was really cool to sort of see something like a new program grow and be a part of that. And then I was the first person from Washington to get to go to Women's Communications Boot Camp. I think it was 2009 that I did that. And so I'm just like a really big cheerleader for young people getting involved in Farm Bureau. Yes. And from there, we can help them find what it is that they feel like they're best at, or where their energy can be directed, because I've gained a tremendous amount personally. And so now, as my county chair and being involved in my county board for the last several years, I find it's important to give back and do what I can to keep, growing our county organization.
I absolutely love that perspective. Well, let's talk a little bit about the current conditions of this industry. So with COVID-19 sweeping in rather quickly and the far-reaching protective measures put in place by our state, there have been many unforeseen consequences on the agriculture community. And that may be even putting it lightly. So give us some perspective here with regards to the impact on the cattle industry specifically. What are some of the challenges that you've seen?
Sure. So that's really a developing story or, developing situation. Sure. But when I map in Washington in particular, how this has unfolded, when we had our stay-at-home order in place middle March, it was like the 16th or something, right? The early impacts were really on our consumers, where they started seeing maybe some, space in the meat counter and everything.
Right.
Also their eating habits changed overnight, with restaurants or food service being closed or really limited. And so the supply chain, we had all this beef that was, prepared to market, but the supply chain needed a minute to get the product that was slated for food service over to retail where possible. And then consumers were really going to the retail and buying more quantity, presumably not to have to go to the store as frequently as they typically do. And so the retailers were having a hard time keeping up. So that was the early part of it. And then looking ahead into the end of March and April, it's really those processing plant closures and slowing down of processing on the packer side that is impacting producers. We have feeders with fat cattle with nowhere to send them. And that starts backing up the marketing opportunities down to the cow-calf sector, down to our level. And so then looking longer term, the food service market, kind of really follows the overall economy based on my kind of experience in watching this since the last recession, and really feeling pretty optimistic up until like a couple months ago about what we were seeing there as far as demand and avenues for our product. Those premium cuts and things that our high-end restaurants look for, we don't know when or if that business is coming back and how that will look. So that can decrease the carcass value heavily. And that's not really a positive market for us to be producing in. Carol Dumas at the Capitol Press interviewed an ag economist yesterday, and I thought that was a really good article that helped me kind of wrap my mind around and simplify a pretty complicated issue for us.
Yes. Well, and that maybe this is a little bit of an aside, but playing off of that, kind of, I know in the initial or the early stages of this crisis, there was, in essence, this disconnect that we saw. Farmers and ranchers, they're still working. Agriculture is an essential operation. And likewise, you mentioned people are still needing to eat. Maybe our eating habits are shifting or morphing a little bit. But there was this gap in between that we're talking about shortages in grocery stores, yet we're also hearing about people having to dump food or the potential of euthanizing animals, things like that. So there's food, obviously, and people still need it. So explain to me the middle. Where's that disconnect?
So probably the best way to simplify it is people don't eat cattle, people eat beef. So even though we think of those two commodities completely interconnected, they're actually two separate commodities. So that's where, like, on the market side of them, things can be really disparate. But it looks like we're only operating in the US at about 60% of our processing capacity. And that's, again, to afford the necessary safety and health measures for the employees that work in them. This is really, like I said, it's developing every day, like whether or not we're kind of going in the right direction or wrong direction, and where it will settle as far as what type of processing capacity compared to what we usually have available is really what's going to dictate, again, the market for the folks, the producers on my side of the equation, and then what people are able to see in the grocery store. Or, I was reading that Wendy's is, running out of their fresh patties. And it's really just where that bottleneck can occur, because it all needs to be processed, at these plants that are under USDA safety inspection before it can get put in a box and get out to the retailers or the restaurants that are operating.
Well, so how are you and other ranchers addressing these challenges? What are ranchers doing in the meantime? So obviously you're mentioning, some of that middle area seems to kind of have broken down, and a lot of it probably is due to the restaurants or these kind of areas where you will socially gather and have food together. Those aren't available. And so people are having to figure out new contracts or new ways to navigate through that. So how are ranchers dealing or addressing with these challenges? What are they doing in the meantime?
So on our level, the only way I can describe it is everything is normal and nothing is normal.
Right.
Because as you know, I was trying to explain this to another person because they were asking how concerned we were about the actual COVID-19 and like ourselves and people around us getting ill. And I said, short of, we're built for social distancing out here. Right. Washington is the closest town with any services, and it's 15 miles away. Like our day-to-day life, like I said, other than being an instant homeschool teacher, which was not what I really planned to add to my resume ever. Otherwise, short of nuclear fallout, we're going out and we're taking care of animals. We've got our irrigation firing up. There's really no choice but to continue to do what we do. It's really just a matter of, and I really think this is where the processing capacity to get these cattle turned into beef, in the long term, and that's really what's going to kind of make or break, whether or not this is something we can sustain a living on. And I think it's just important the way that everybody handles it differently. We're all raising beef cattle that are doing what we're doing, but there's a million different ways to do it. And I think what our operation has always tried to do is like kind of give ourselves as much flexibility as possible in terms of marketing and in terms of watching the trends that are happening. This is a pandemic. This is like a really unique situation, but like market drops and stuff like on our end aren't unique. There's weather issues, there's all these factors. Farmers and ranchers, I think, are just more well built to like weather things like that than maybe the average person. But I think that the main thing is just to be sort of like watching and paying attention and seeking opportunities that might be out there.
So let me ask you this. Is the current situation affecting the cattle industry's future? Will the new normal look any sort of drastically different than it did 3 months ago?
Yeah, so I don't know how much drastically different things can look because something like operating beef processing facilities and stuff is not something that can kind of like crop up overnight, or like, there's a reason why it's as consolidated as it is, and it's a long history. And it's not to say that there isn't other ways to do it or that this is the right way for everybody involved, but it's kind of what we're working with right now. That being said, in some of my work, I'm able to support, I have a client that coincidentally, we've been working for quite a while on building an e-commerce site to, ship boxes of beef directly to other families in Washington, highlight their, opportunity to buy custom whole halves and quarters. And as you might expect, we launched that opportunity just like a week or two ago. And the interest in buying local is even more heightened than I think we typically see here, and particularly for meat. And so I think there's opportunities there. Unfortunately, it gets, again, that processing aspect of it, whereby we only have so much processing capacity in like smaller shops, or what we call USDA exempt slaughter capacity, or smaller USDA inspected shops that allow a producer to sell beef by the cut. Those, I'm hearing, are getting kind of backed up on when they can slaughter and when they can process for those orders. So again, it's like developing every day, every week. And I'm excited to see what people, issues like this, situations like this do help people think outside the box, or maybe push ideas that they had forward that wouldn't, that would kind of be on the back burner. So it's hard to be really optimistic right now, to be quite honest, because when you have feeder cattle that are ready for slaughter and there's nowhere to send them, then there's also no capacity in these feed yards to have calves like ours that would be ready after this summer to go into them.
Yeah.
And so, as you can see, it can just back up, and that's the bread and butter. I mean, that's really like the crux of our supply chain and our system right now. So to expect it to kind of turn on a dime, I think, is really unrealistic. But perhaps we'll see some improvements in how our markets function, and also like better opportunities for local processing of local beef that can reach people in our own communities. There was already interest for that, but this could actually just spur that forward.
Okay. Kind of get people thinking in perhaps a different direction as
or taking action.
Option.
Yeah, like people have been thinking about it and saying, I love buying local. I love knowing my farmer and rancher, but like maybe not taking it seriously because there's meat in the grocery stores. And so, but also just not to be unrealistic. I think, some of the statistics I've seen is, 70% of our country has less than $1,000 in savings. And like in some of these really dense areas, for people to find extra space for freezers and, the things you need to actually, buy products in bulk from a farmer or rancher, there's still like kind of a limitation to that market. And so I don't think it's throwing everything out and starting over. It's hopefully expanding opportunities for the people that really want that.
Well, let me ask you this: as you are the president of the Adams County Farm Bureau, you have a very valuable perspective on how to address this. What can the Farm Bureau, in particular, perhaps even the local county farm bureaus, what can they be doing? What can we be doing to help protect the cattle industry and make sure it stays viable after the COVID-19 crisis has passed and we enter into whatever this new normal will look like? How can the local Farm Bureau be doing that now?
So, I mean, I'm not sure like Farm Bureau can like fix this. And I also, we have to remember this isn't in a vacuum. As much as I say we're in a better spot than some and a worse spot than others, in the sense that like, so say you can't process, I saw the example of like some of our pharmaceuticals, right? The raw products, they can't process them because their work environments are not safe. But those are like chemicals and compounds that can be stored. Like live animals can't really be stored. So that's where we look at, the unique aspects of the negatives here are, I believe in the pork and chicken industries, they're already in some parts of the country having to depopulate because they can't get their products processed because their plants are closing on account of worker safety. Think of the mental toll that takes on the people, the workers and the farmers that have to do that kind of work, like that, that hurts. It also hurts to be, plowing under vegetables. I mean, it really, as much as I'm obsessed sort of with our industry and what's going on with us, like I just have to take a step back and know this isn't happening in a vacuum. I think as long as the Farm Bureau can look at what kind of the industry is rallying around in terms of, some of the market function talks, and the perhaps strongest is if there is a push for in a state like Washington, where we're so heavily regulated, maybe there is such a appetite, so to speak, for local food and like local beef or local meat that there could be some really like grassroots effort on the Farm Bureau part to say, like, we know that consumers want our producers' meat. It is exceedingly difficult for them to get it in a way that works for them, in smaller quantities, that's only reserved for USDA inspected meat. Is there a way that we can tweak the programs that exist with the Washington State Department of Agriculture to actually, take that red tape, keep it safe, but take that red tape away that would actually make it viable? Those are the efforts that I think Farm Bureau is really great at. And some of the successes for, really pushing against this, these regulations have built in my lifetime, watching them since I was a little kid. The regulations have built up over and, little bits and pieces. If we can start dismantling some of that, I think Farm Bureau has a place in that. We have a board meeting tomorrow night, and we will be voting on sort of a like local relief package. So this doesn't really have anything to do with like the beef industry, but we were hoping to use this opportunity to really be relevant and be helpful to our local communities outside of agriculture. So It's way more fun to be out here doing what we do when there's a few restaurants within a drive, like within a decent distance. And, there's some hair shops and nail shops, and there's really not a lot of that in some of these smaller communities in Adams County. And so we will be brainstorming. So we'll be deciding on an amount that our county can afford to pick some businesses that have really been hard hit because they've been shut down by the governor's stay-home order, and do gift cards or gift certificates, and then do a drawing of our members to receive those gift certificates to go spend them at these, just to have our Farm Bureau, our county Farm Bureau, show our our other quote non-essential businesses that haven't gotten to do what they do for a living or have been really hard hit by it, and show them that we support them. And I think in turn that helps us strengthen Farm Bureau, because those other folks in our community support us back.
Oh, that's a fantastic initiative. That's a great idea. Well, finally, and you've mentioned a couple things, particularly focused on those consumers in the beef industry, but what is one thing that you might like to communicate to consumers when it comes to the current situation in this industry?
That's a great question. I've really just been focused on watching our search traffic and seeing what people are searching for in terms of beef. And cook ground beef to 160 degrees. Food safety is number one. But really, I think it's about balancing your expectations and knowing that, farmers and ranchers are out here doing what we do. And we, on the one side, we feel incredibly blessed to be able to do that. And we understand that other people, like people in our more urban areas and cities, have big concerns about the health aspect of COVID-19. In fact, it's taken me a minute to stop. And in a lot of our conversations amongst each other, board members, other farmers and ranchers around me, we're built for social distancing in our daily lives. And so I just want consumers to know that while we have our own challenges, we completely understand that they're in a really rough spot too. We're not going to give up on our consumers. We're going to keep raising cattle to supply beef, but so don't give up on us, I guess you'd say. Whenever you see some space in a meat case, just understand that it has everything to do with supply chain and us figuring it out, and not, that we're actually producing less food for people. There's actually a really fantastic explanation by Temple Grandin in Forbes today that explains the processing bottleneck in a way that doesn't really blame anyone. It's not saying that, our processing sector has been, irresponsible, or the way that our industry functions typically is negative. It just explains how in an interruption like COVID or a flood or, think of a natural disaster, whenever we have a reduction in our processing, it's going to result in changes for the consumer in their meat cases and their where they typically buy our product.
Yes. I was actually curious if you were going to bring that article up. I read it myself. That was an excellent piece.
There is the other resource that I throw out there is through the Washington State Beef Commission on the wahbeef.org website. There's a local beef directory that we built, probably 5 or 6 years ago. But we're able to have producers that want to be included in the directory listed with their contact information because they sell beef directly to consumers. And so if you go to wahbeef.org, you can go to that page and you can filter by county. So you can filter for your county or surrounding to research different local farmers and ranchers that are offering beef to consumers, and then reach out and see if you can get beef supplied to you that way. So we've seen probably like a 200% increase in just search traffic that's been driving people to that page over March and April.
That is a fantastic resource, and I appreciate you sharing that. That is great. With that, Bridget, thank you so much for taking the time with us and sharing this information. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys for reaching out. And I just appreciate you guys doing this type of work and all the Olympia work full time, where then volunteers like us can kind of jump in and help where we can. We just really appreciate having that, that resource in you guys that you're on the job all the time. So thank you.
Well, I also want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us. It's always appreciated, and I look forward to chatting again soon. The WFB Update is a production of the Washington Farm Bureau, the voice of agriculture in Washington State, ensuring our family farms continue to feed the world. To learn more, visit our website at www.wsfb.com.